Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. I'm Adrian, and today we are talking about Rakdos Burning Hands Goes to League recap, where I'm going to talk about the things that I did wrong and the things that I think probably could have been done right. If you stick around to the end of the video, I'm also going to do a couple little sections. One, things that we can do to change the deck right now if you are playing this deck, and two, things we can do to actually upgrade this deck to make it a tier 2 deck, where it'll actually go toe-to-toe with any of these decks a lot better than the current version. The current version is semi-budget still, but we're going to try and make it so it is really heavily competitive. Anyways, let's get into it, starting with Game 1. Game 1 was against Jund. Now, Jund is similar to Grixis for us. We generally have a really hard time going against Grixis or Jund because both of those decks have a lot of disruption and can really put us off of our master game plan. They even have the fact that a lot of these decks have, specifically Jund, has main board Abrupt Decay, which means they're getting rid of our Howling Mines, they're getting rid of our Temple Bells, and something that I did really wrong in this match is I didn't actually go on the sideboard and take out a bunch of my Howling Mines. I should have taken out all of the Howling Mines, and probably not the Temple Bells. The Temple Bells, we can control it by giving stuff on our turn. The thing I should have done is, once I took all those cards out, is I should have put in Shrapnel Blast, and I should have also right away put in Silent Arbiter. Silent Arbiter isn't really good in the deck, and I'm going to explain why he actually probably should be removed from the deck, but he is worth putting in against Grixis or Jund if you are running him, because he has a 5 toughness, which means he generally blocks most of the things they're throwing at us. Obviously, in this case, he wouldn't be able to stop the Tarmogoyfs, which is a downside. But what I should have, speaking of Tarmogoyfs actually, so the other thing I should have done on top of putting Silent Arbiter in to help block against Tarmogoyfs and to help block against most creatures is I also should have put in all 3 Rakdos Charms, because you can use them to wipe away your opponent's graveyard or wipe away our graveyard, which is maybe the better bet, and actually get rid of Tarmogoyf in a lot of ways, where you can actually shrink him back down to a reasonable size. Usually we would be targeting our graveyard because we have artifacts, lands, instant sorceries, and creatures and enchantments, so we have everything going into the graveyard minus planeswalkers. So I guess there's actually a couple other types of cards potentially that could be in there, but anyways, we have a ton of different stuff, so we'd actually use Rakdos Charm to regularly wipe our graveyard, so things like Tarmogoyf aren't actually really that big a deal. So that was the biggest mistake I made in that game, and that's probably why I actually lost 2 of the games, is I just didn't sideboard very well, and I kind of left in stuff that was giving our opponent the advantage. Playing a Howling Mine against Jund or Grixis for that matter, or Naya Burn actually as well, is like just feeding your opponent where you don't really want to do that. And yes, I know our deck obviously wants to feed those decks, or obviously wants to feed our opponent and then blow them up by a lot of damage, but that is just really not how we can deal with that deck. Anyhow, carrying on, Game 2 was against Elves. Now, Elves is usually a pretty good matchup for us. We can usually go 50-50 against Elves. Again, the main thing with Elves, and it's really obvious with Elves, is you need to take out Howling Mines immediately, and Temple Bell needs to be played only at the end of your opponent's step, because we can usually control them enough that they're not going to be playing a whole bunch of stuff. So I just kind of did a bad job at sideboarding against Elves, and I just got unlucky. I mean, Game 3 against Elves was just me not drawing what I needed to take him down. I had a lot of stuff. I mean, the deck runs 3 main board wipes. I mean, we're running 2 Pyroplasms and an Anger of the Gods because we don't want to have a problem against Elves or other aggro decks in an immediately first game. So that was just the way Elves panned out. I mean, again, I could have sideboarded a little bit, maybe sideboarded a little bit better. Moving on to Game 3. Now, this is the one where you guys actually saw me playing against Dragons, which was just another deck that I played. I just quickly recorded a replacement episode, but I ended up going against Bant. Let me just tell you quickly what happened in that deck is, for starters, I've never really played too much against Bant. I think this was my second time playing against Bant in real life or on MTGO, so I wasn't 100% familiar. I totally forgot about how it actually just totally murders you, and I just didn't sideboard properly for it. The first game I lost on I lost because of the combo where it just like gets infinitely large kind of thing and just kills you really badly, and then I just didn't again. I didn't sideboard. Well, maybe I did sideboard properly. It was a really hard matchup for me. I didn't have enough removal. I maybe could have actually probably mulliganed down to make sure I got removal. That's one thing I've noticed is I'm not the best at mulliganing, and it's a skill that I need to work on, and it's one of those things where I think that's probably why I lost against Bant, is I kept a hand that was really good for the starting game, but not good against Bant, or not good against that specific deck. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why I actually may have lost more than one game in the league matches, if you're watching, is I kind of kept a hand that is good under normal circumstances against just kind of majority of decks, but against specific decks, especially once you're getting into like playing against League, where you're playing against like top tier, tier 1, sometimes tier 2 decks all the time, even on your 5th game, you really need to be more on your A game, and I really need to be better on, should I mulligan, am I going to survive if I don't draw X card, and I just didn't do that, so that was a big thing. Obviously I won against Dragons. I mean, this deck is probably just, this version of the deck is just below kind of tier 2, but the upgraded version is a lot better, and it really is kind of solid tier 2, so that's another thing. Anyhow, moving on to game number 4, we played against the single deck that gives us the most problems, and that is Naya Burn. Naya Burn just generally just can't. Actually, I don't think this was Naya Burn. I think we were actually playing against a different kind of Burn deck, because I don't remember seeing any white, actually. We were playing against Burn. Burn always has given us trouble, because our game plan is we're going to be making them draw cards, and then they're going to take damage, and Burn needs to have that critical mass of damage spells, and even with something like Temple Bell, where we're going to like control how much they're going to be drawing, we still generally just give them too many cards, and we just can't deal. So unless they get a really bad opening hand, it just doesn't work for us. Against the Naya Burn deck, I did end up playing the Eidolon in hopes that it would actually slow him down. I think I actually maybe had both games, I can't remember. Anyways, where I played that in hopes that it would slow him down enough, but I didn't have enough going on, and I just don't have enough to slow down Naya Burn. And that's actually one of the things that is the biggest fault in our sideboard, is we don't have something to deal with Burn, and Burn is too big of the meta to not deal with Burn properly, so there's a few things in the additional upgraded sideboard, which again I'll talk about at the end of the video, where we have a better way of dealing with Burn. It's the single hardest matchup for us, and there's easily a way to deal with it. Going into Game 5, and I'm just going to say the exact same thing I did the last one, because Game 5 was also against Naya Burn. It was actually Naya Burn this time. It wasn't the other version that we played, just Burn deck. It was a straight-up Naya Burn deck, and we won Game 1. I mean, we won one of the 3 games, which kind of blew my mind, and I think it was largely due to the fact that our opponent kept a 1-land hand, which is more luck than it is skill, because, again, Burn is so hard for us to play around. It's just super duper hard. I mean, we're feeding our opponent extra cards because we need them to have extra cards, because, you know, literally the shell of our deck, not the shell, the core of our deck is fill your opponent's hand and then blow stuff out of the water. And it's just, it is a hard thing for us to deal with. We can beat it, it just takes some serious practice and some serious knowing what to play when and where and how, and definitely mulliganing aggressively. I think in this game here I actually had some really good opening hands against Naya. I had a couple Pyroplasms at one point, and I definitely had a Lightning Bolt, which, I mean, you can get rid of, you know, their Goblin Guide, or you can get rid of their Swift Spear, or get rid of Eidolon if they do play an Eidolon, because Eidolon against Burn is gonna, unless we're playing Eidolon where we can actually be swinging in and getting extra damage in and kind of letting them deal with it, when we're on the receiving end of Eidolon, we kind of need to deal with it right away as well. So in Game 5, I feel like I actually sideboarded really good against Naya Burn, but it just wasn't enough, again, to deal with it and to finish the game off, because some things we really want to do is we want to get rid of their lands, we want to get rid of their spells, we want to just try and take them down as fast as we can, but we just didn't get there, we just couldn't get there. So anyways, that is my attempt at explaining everything that I think I did well and everything I think I did wrong in the league matches. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I mean, I would rather if I actually won some matches, but that's not the way it goes, because League on MTGO, you're against top tier level 1 decks, tier 1 decks the entire time. It's not like going to an FNM Magic, where the people that have weaker decks generally kind of float to the bottom, and you're fighting against people that are probably on the same level as you if you do win like 2 matches, or do lose 2 matches, sorry. Anyways, let's move into upgrades for this deck that I would recommend if you actually want to upgrade this, now that I've actually playtested it even more. So I do have some feedback on how to deal with the higher end meta. Let's talk about that now. So all of these upgrades are actually for the sideboard to help deal with the current meta rather than upgrading the actual deck, which actually runs pretty well. There are some major upgrades for the deck, which I'll talk about later, but first of all, let's talk about these cards here. First of all, Shrapnel Blast. We're going to go down to a 1 of in the deck. It just wasn't as effective as I was hoping it would be. It's not being used to necessarily do much damage to the game. We'd rather just destroy creatures rather than try to deal damage to them. And if we are going to use Shrapnel Blast, we're going to use it to like close the game out, so we're going down to 1 of them. Same with Crumble the Dust, we're going down to 1 of them because we have 2 main board land destruction cards already, so we're dealing with Tron, we're dealing with Infect and Manlands, so they're just not as effective because Crumble the Dust is really slow, and we have better things we'd rather be doing with 4 mana anyways. We're going up a single Extirpate. Now this really could be Surgical Extraction, but it's just, this is a budgeter version. If you have the money, go get Surgical Extraction and put this in place of Extirpate. It basically allows us to grab something out of our opponent's graveyard and then remove that card from their entire deck. Next we have 2 Guttural Response. These haven't changed because they're used for the same thing. They actually work really well. Followed up by 2 Ratchet Bombs, which also have not changed. And then we have Sun Droplet. Now Sun Droplet and Dragon's Claw, which actually we have 2 copies of Dragon's Claw, are kind of like the same card. They're doing a little bit different. Dragon's Claw gains us 1 life every single time someone plays a red spell. Most of our deck is red spells, so it generally has a lot of value for us. And if we're going against Burn, this is how we're going to be gaining that life back, because we're basically going to be gaining a life whenever they play a spell or whenever we play a spell, so it should allow us to stabilize and allow us to actually get the advantage on Burn without accidentally feeding them their win condition. And Sun Droplet does a similar thing, except every single time we take damage, we put that many counters on Sun Droplet, and at the beginning of each upkeep, so our upkeep and our opponent's upkeep, we can remove one of those counters and gain a life. So basically gaining 2 life a turn really slows down Burn, and it actually slows down some of the other decks we have a hard time with as well, making them having to deal with Sun Droplet right away. Otherwise, we're just going to gain that life back, and they're just not going to be able to deal with us fast enough, and then we'll just do a major amount of damage to them in the late game. Then we have 2 copies of Terminate. Now this is really upgrading against Doomblade. Doomblade is fantastic, but it doesn't hit black creatures, and it doesn't stop some decks like Elves, where they could potentially regenerate a bunch of them. Terminate would just do a better job at that, just like killing off their creatures right away, and us not having to deal with it. And lastly, we still have 3 copies of Rakdos Charm in the deck because this card is amazing, and I don't need to tell you what it does because it is the exact same as the deck. And lastly, before we wrap up this video, I want to talk about an upgraded version of the actual deck. The big things I've changed in this one is I've added in 4 copies of Simian Spirit Guide, 4 copies of Chalice of the Void, and 3 copies of Blood Moon. Now, what are these cards actually doing? Simian Spirit Guide is allowing us to play things on turn 1. It basically allows us to accelerate our game plan, especially if we have one in our opening hand, which is ideally the reason why we'd actually have it, because then we can actually play Chalice of the Void on first turn, basically shutting down all of our opponent's 1-drop spells, or we can hold on to it if we have a Blood Moon in hand, and we can play Blood Moon on turn 2, which allows us to shut down any deck that is not playing mono colors, which in Modern is a lot of decks. I mean, look at the decks that we have the hardest time with. We have Naya Burn, which is a 3-color deck, we have Grixis Control, which is really hard for us, and Jund. So all of those decks get seriously knocked down a peg, and we can usually take them out if we can get a Blood Moon onto the table right away. Also, Blood Moon completely stops Tron and slows the heck out of Infect. So these cards are all really, really good. The one downside about playing Chalice of the Void, though, which is something that we need to be keeping aware of, is we need to take out all, or I have, I should say, taken out all of the 1-drop cards out of this deck, including the sideboard. So the sideboard's changing a little bit, but it's not changing that much. It's really quite close to the sideboard that I just rang off for you guys. The cards we're pulling out of the deck is obviously all of our Lightning Bolts. We're actually going to be pulling out all of the Hangerback Walkers because Chalice of the Void is technically a better artifact for us because it allows us to control our opponent rather than just getting chump blockers. And Chalice of the Void can technically be cast for 0 mana, so we can get an artifact on the table really quick for us, really easily. Also, I've taken out 2 Toils and Troubles. They're just the least effective card in the deck, so need to make room somewhere, and that's the way we're going to do it. And that's really it. I have put up a new deck list in the description below this video, so you can actually go take a look at the new upgraded deck because it is pretty spicy, I would have to say. I'm actually working on building this myself in paper so I can actually play this at F&M at my local game store. It is expensive because Chalice of the Void and Blood Moon are both like $40 cards, so that's a lot of slow upgrading for me as well. Anyways, that's the entire video. I hope you guys enjoyed Rakdos Burning Hand Goes to League. Sorry that I didn't manage to win any games. There was some complications, and I'm just not always the best player. I'll admit that straight away. Until next time, though, I'm Adrian. This is Giant Monster Games. Smash that like button if you like this video, and subscribe to Giant Monster Games if you want to see more content like this or other things that I put up on the channel. Don't forget to game like a giant monster!